Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ark episode 22, and we are getting very close to Christmas. And guess who decided to drop into town? My good friend Nick Goiran, who has just dropped into Sydney. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Joel. We've talked quite a bit about this possibility, and yes, I've been in town for the last couple of days, and it's great to be with you here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. For those of you that don't know, Nick is in the Liberal Party in WA. He is the Honourable Nick Goiran in the WA Liberals for the Upper House, and they've recently changed the rules for the Upper House. Now it's 4-year terms, and we've got an interesting situation where you have an election coming up, scheduled for the 8th of March in 2025, so it's on my radar. I'm very excited to work with the great Libs over there, the interesting freedom parties over there as well. But you know how much I love WA. I went there 5 times last year, and the Light newspaper is based out of WA as well. I know you're a big fan of the Light newspaper, and I'm really eager to get back over there early next year to have a chat with you guys.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, Joel. I think we're the next jurisdiction that's up for an election. Saturday the 8th of March is the big day in Western Australia. We have fixed-term elections. We've had fixed-term elections since an episode in 2008 that triggered that. Of course, the only thing that could stop that from happening is if Prime Minister Albanese decides to call his election on the 8th of March. Yeah. I think it's unlikely, but of course it's a technical possibility.
It's really good. It's actually really good to have you here because, again, guys, I don't see Nick in person unless I'm in Perth or he's here. So we were just chatting off camera about the potential of an early election in March. So obviously, you know, for those of you who've been following the last 2 elections in Australia, they've been held in May federally for in 2019 with ScoMo, and then in 2019 with. So 2019 with ScoMo and 2022 was with ScoMo and Albo. And it's the latest date that it can be held for the next federal election is May 25th in 2025. But he could call it early. Now, there's been a lot of speculation, especially on the east coast of Australia, that the Libs may go early because of how much they're internally dragging their feet on pre-selections in New South Wales, in, I think, Victoria as well, and potentially Queensland. I'm really worried about this because if they go early in March, that's going to sort of conflict with my plans for the WA election. WA election scheduled for March 8th.
Yeah.
You were saying to me just off camera that they can't constitutionally actually held it on the same day as WA. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
That's right. And as a result of that, in the Western Australian legislation that fixes these terms and these elections, we have a provision that says if the federal election is called for the same day, which is the second Saturday in March every 4 years, then we automatically move by 1 week. So we would then be on the 15th of March. A bit of controversy in Western Australia recently with the Premier there, Rodger Cook, apparently getting advice on what his options were if his friend Mr Albanese called the election on the same day. I don't know why he needed to get advice. Not complicated, just read the legislation. It's going to be 1 week later, be the 15th. But anyway,
right.
That's Mr Cook for you.
Do you think that would help the WA Libs if it was actually pushed back an extra week? Or, you know, if
it would be total chaos. I mean, if Prime Minister Albanese wants to call the election on the 8th of March and force Western Australia into having it on the 15th of March, it would be chaos because you'll then have an overlap with regard to early voting. And as you know, Joel, early voting has become a bigger and bigger thing with each election. The percentage of people that vote early is on the rise. And so to have the overlap of early voting with state and federal, it'll be chaos. Labor will be blamed. So, look, selfishly, I hope Albanese does it, but I don't think if he's got any sensible advisors in his office, they're not going to tell him to do it on the same day.
So it would hurt Labor more.
Absolutely, because it will be chaos and people will be annoyed. And when people are annoyed, they blame the government of the day. And, of course, in the West Australian case, well, the state government is Labor, the federal government is Labor. If they want to roll the dice, go for it. But I just can't see that's going to happen.
WA does have a very special place in my heart. I remember we did a live, I think it might have been Instagram interview after the Voice win. It was around about late October in last year. And I really liked WA because you guys kind of took one for the team, if you remember. During the Voice, the polling, over the course of the polling, it was starting very, very high, very positively early on.
Yeah.
And I've got this great graphic when it turned. If you look at this graphic here, guys, what it shows you is the start, very, very positive. We've got a massive majority of the country supporting it. And then it's sort of at this point, you might remember the dates a little bit better. The WA heritage laws really kicked off. Big protests were coming up. By the time we got to here, we saw a situation where Premier Cook, he was basically like, all right, we're going to repeal the heritage laws. We're not going to be doing it anymore. And is that the timeline or am I just sort of seeing things into it?
No, well, I haven't seen that graphic before, Joel, but I think it's a really excellent analysis. And I remember very early on in the piece, this Voice proposal, it felt a bit hopeless for those of us who are really concerned about its in enshrining division within our federal constitution. And therefore, as a result of that, enshrining division in our country. And we did feel a bit hopeless. I know you were certainly one of the ones who were more optimistic, certainly than me early on.
Right.
And
I like it when you remind me of that because everyone was like, it's going to pass.
No, it was quite amazing. But then the sequence of events, as you say, quite right. And there were, I think, two very significant events. And Western Australia definitely had a part to play because it was the shambolic rollout of these Aboriginal cultural heritage laws by the WA Labor government that was quite a catalyst. It was a piece of legislation that they rammed through the parliament. Now, for those observing, they might say, well, what does it mean to ram a piece of legislation through parliament? Well, in Western Australia, we have two houses of parliament. There's proper processes to be followed. We have standing orders. We have things like a requirement that if a government introduces a bill in the lower house, it sits on the table of the lower house for 3 weeks. Well, why does it do that? Well, because for opposition members, it's the first time that you've seen this thing. So it gives you an opportunity to get briefings, to speak to stakeholders, to decide what your party position is, so on and so forth. They rammed these laws through both houses of Parliament. And, we obviously pushed back on that, but that's what happened. Now, in the end, then the implementation was so shambolic. We had local governments that weren't sure whether they could plant a tree or not. When people were raising concerns, we had the Premier, Mr. Cook, calling them dogs. These people are, you people are dogs. Returning to your vomit. So we had very unstatesmanlike language from the leaders who were doubling down. We had, as I say, local governments and ordinary West Aussies who were confused as to what they can and can't do. It was totally shambolic. And it is extraordinary, Joel, that in Western Australia, where we have a Labor government that has total control of both houses of Parliament, like they have an absolute majority, you might call it a super majority, in both houses of Parliament. Now, of course, it's not unusual for a government to have a majority in the lower house. That's how they form government, right? Other than those rare instances where there's a minority government. But to have total control of the upper house, they don't have to persuade a Green, an Independent, nobody. They just ram through whatever they like. And in that context, for them to have repealed the legislation, the pressure was so great that they had to overturn their own legislation was remarkable. And so I think your graphic is quite right on there. The other thing would be interesting to do some correlation and some analysis is what impact was the entry of Jacinta Price into the whole debate. Because, I think the fair-minded political observers say that was pretty important and, created great momentum for the No campaign.
No, absolutely. And I think that, there was a coalescing at the very start of the Voice Referendum. It's so funny, we've been a year on from the win and everyone's been trying to, be like, oh, this is why it happened and this is why that happened. And at the very start, the Conservatives were divided. That was the problem. The Conservatives were in a situation where they had, Recognise a Better Way, and they had two other groups, and they had Advance ready to, ramp things up. And it was only slightly later that Recognise a Better Way sort of got wound down. People like Warren Mundine, he joined the Advance crew, and him and Jacinta Price became sort of a power couple on this particular topic, and they just sort of rammed the arguments. They just hit the pavement and did a great job. In terms of the ground game, it was terrible. There was the no voters did not have any ability to sort of mobilise ground troops. It was actually shocking. And no one said that yet, which has been a little bit frustrating to me, because if we want to win something like that again, that was a very easy proposal to win, the Voice proposal. I mean, it was a no-brainer. Aussies were going to slam it down once they worked out there was no detail. But when you saw a situation where we're going to have a close vote in the future, maybe there's going to be something a bit closer that we vote on. You want to make sure that you have ground troops and to get out there.
Yeah.
But look, regardless, Advance did a great job. They got the win in the end. And, the whole team, and it was a team effort, which was really good.
Look, and the other thing, Joel, is as you say, it's been a year on. One of the things that I would like people to reflect on is how has the cause for Indigenous Australians improved over the last 12 months? Because I think, again, the vast majority of Australians, I certainly can say this in the West Australian context, genuinely care. They genuinely care. They genuinely have the view that every life has infinite value, that every life matters, and we want to see everyone flourish.
Yeah.
And I think that's at least where there ought to be some bipartisanship, but we've actually seen nothing over the last 12 months.
What happened to the emergency, Nick? It was an emergency. We need the Voice now. People are dying, and people are dying in custody, and there's no way to resolve it. People voted no, overwhelmingly no. In some states, they almost voted 70% no.
Yep. Not
including the people that didn't vote, which we all know that people that didn't vote probably would have leaned more to the no side. But then on top of that, they rammed through. They demonstrated that all that crap about, we need consent between relationships. They didn't believe in the consent of the governed and the governors.
Yep.
And they just sort of rammed it through on a state level. In South Australia, they've got their first South Australia Voice now, who we've seen, who wasn't elected by some kind of, popular vote by all the Aboriginal people. There was a very tiny participation rate of Aboriginal people in South Australia that engaged in that vote. And we're going to see that rolled out in all the states. And, I mean, the heartbreaking thing for someone like me is the majority of the Liberal Party on the East Coast, they do support some sort of a treaty process, like the Victorian Liberals, I do believe the Queensland Liberals as well, New South Wales as well. And it's a lot of people is like, well, hang on, a referendum is one of the most sacred ways Aussie people have in their arsenal to say yes or no to something and to amend the Constitution. What do we have to do to stop this?
Yeah.
I mean, what would you reply?
Well, and the thing is, referendums need to be respected, right? I mean, I'll give you an example by way of an analogy. In Western Australia, because it's great to be here in Sydney where you've got your daylight savings operating. We don't have that in Western Australia, right? So we're a bit like Queensland, and a lot like Queensland in that respect. And there have been referendums in Western Australia in the past on this issue of daylight savings. Now, then it would have been around about, let's say, 2006, 2008, something like that. There was a proposal that was put forward that said, well, we're going to force on the people of Western Australia a 3-year trial of daylight savings. Now, that infuriated Western Australians. Why? Because they had consistently said, we don't want it. Well, what do you reckon happened after the 3-year trial? The voters came at the referendum with their brickbats and made sure that it was overwhelmingly defeated. So referendums need to be respected. You might not agree with the outcome of the referendum, but what is the point of going through such an expensive exercise to test the will of people and then go and doing the exact opposite? That's what people, I think, detest most of all about politics, is when leaders of the day say one thing and go and do the other.
And they're not cheap, are they? It was $500 million for the federal. It's like emergency. Yep. We've got to help the Aboriginal people.
And then meanwhile, even if we forgive them for all of that, what's happening now? What are the concrete steps that are being taken? What's the plan? It's actually disgraceful.
It is, and and then on top of that, I forgot to say, guys, there was all the donations to the yes side and the no side. 20 million for the no side, 100 million for the yes side. Like, we're talking 500, 600 $1 million. I mean, do you know how many? I mean, you might know the costs. How many nuclear power stations could we have like purchased and built? How many coal power stations could we purchased and built with that money? I used to know the numbers. I've forgotten the numbers now, though.
Yeah, and I'd like Western Australian voters to remember that the chief champion of this whole expensive, divisive voice debate was Premier Rodger Cook. No one was a bigger champion for it than him. And he and his team obtained advice. I kept asking in Parliament, release the advice. Release the advice before we vote. Western Australians deserve to see what advice you've got. What is this advice all about? How is a federal voice going to impact Western Australia? Because obviously it was going to. To this day, they still haven't released it. They still keep it secret. Now, it was wrong to keep it secret before the referendum. What could possibly justify keeping it secret now? Like 1 year later, why keep hiding the advice? So I think we've still got to keep pressing them for it because, as you say, otherwise they then look to roll this out at a state level.
They're quite brilliant, aren't they? Like, they don't stop. Like, even facing an overwhelmingly 60% loss, it's like, no, they keep going. And it's like, it reminds me of Brexit in the UK in 2016. They won by like 51.4% of the vote to leave the European Union. And it took them like 8 years or something to properly leave. And you look at that as a bubble, this Canberra bubble, the only place voting no being Canberra. I can see why a lot of people in WA are like, those bloody eastern states, all their, the amount of problems they send us. Mate, Canberra's round the corner. It's a 3-hour drive from here. And we hate them more. I guarantee you we hate them more. And it's really frustrating because we see what's going on. We see our taxpayer funding, we're spending it to help people, to help the vulnerable. The Aboriginal people voted no. They actually voted no. And one of the things that their saving grace is, well, we're going to pursue the treaty because rural Aboriginals voted yes. That's not true. They manipulated that vote. And I'll go as far to say that. Jacinta Price on the victory night tried to say that. But I think a lot of people were like, oh, like that's not, let's let's be magnanimous in victory. And let's not go out there and say anything conspiratorial. On election day, Alec Dumaji, a friend of mine who I interviewed on The Voice, he's sort of like one of the heads of his tribe and his area. He said, I'm voting no. He's sort of part of the black sovereignty movement. He was on the phone with his mum, who said the election workers for the Electoral Commission were telling me that the Voice is going to do this and that. And he got this all on camera as he was recording it. It was all lies. You tell me, what kind of...
Well, in any event, they shouldn't be providing any information other than simply how to vote. That's not their role whatsoever. So if that has occurred, that is also a disgrace and ought to be investigated.
And it's not, and that's the problem. We saw this happening specifically in the rural voting centres that were set up in the Northern Territory, for example. And so they didn't have to rig the whole thing. They just had to sort of manipulate these little areas. And look, maybe these people, they just didn't realise and whatever. But that should never happen.
No, and I'm long fed up with lack of investigation when credible complaints are put forward. And we see this across the board in governance, both at a state and a federal level. There's too much just simply shrugging of the shoulders, going, oh well, and no further follow-up. We've got a classic case of that in Western Australia at the moment, where the WA police have been issuing disqualification letters to registered firearm owners.
Oh, yes.
And these letters, these disqualification letters, have been found by Western Australia's State Administrative Tribunal to have been done without power. In other words, the prospective law has not yet started, and yet WA police are acting as if the new law has already started. State Administrative Tribunal have obviously said you can't do that. Now, the concern for me, Joel, is that I raised this with the Police Commissioner and the relevant ministers in a parliamentary hearing during budget estimates in June of this year. I referred to it as them rolling the dice on the rule of law. And yet they've done that anyway. the tribunal has exposed what they've done. And then this week in Parliament, when I've asked the government about it, including the Attorney General, they just shrug their shoulders and say, I specifically asked the Attorney General, so are you going to refer this incident of police misconduct to the Corruption and Crime Commission for their investigation? That's the whole purpose of having Corruption and Crime Commissions, to look into police misconduct. They're applying the law even though they know that it doesn't exist. The Attorney General's answer in Parliament, no, I won't refer it. This is not good enough, and this happens time and time again. So whether it's a case of some misbehaviour, misconduct in the Voice Referendum, this instance in Western Australia with regard to disqualification letters on firearms, I mean, they're just two of many examples. An investigation needs to be done by the proper authorities, and it's not okay for leaders to simply go, no, we're not going to do that, and change the subject.
Yeah, and it's shocking how few people know about this, because they were sort of, at the time, they were revelling in the voice win. They didn't realise. But yeah, we need a free and fair press to get these things out. I mean, I don't know what you did to offend the West Australian newspaper, but they just seem like they really like you, you know? They just always, they're like, if they ever need content, they just got like a dartboard in their office of Nick Goiran. You know, I don't know, but can you explain that to me, why they're not big fans of you? Because I'm not a fan of them either.
Look, there's no no explanation's ever been provided to me. So what I'm about to say is just, you know, my educated guess, my speculation. I think, you know, Joel, you've been observing politics for a very long time. You would know that any hard conservative voice is guaranteed to be attacked by mainstream media, right? I mean, when does that not happen? And so in Western Australia, I guess they have been the necessary ingredients, with, you know, my style of politics being, if you're going to go for something, then you've got to follow it through to the nth degree. You don't take up issues and leave them half finished. This is what too many parliamentarians do. You've got to persevere in every single issue that you take up until you get a comprehensive answer. Yeah. None of this yes minister answer nonsense, which happens all the time from public servants and ministers. So I think, you know, some people in the mainstream media, they don't like that. They don't like it when a conservative does it and doesn't stop. So, look, my attitude is I just try to communicate to people outside the mainstream options. My weekly newsletter that goes out is now going to 96,000 Western Australians every Friday, 6:15. So we just go around them. We just talk to people direct. That's building and building from a standing start 2 years ago. And obviously it's working because people are sticking with it and it's growing. Yeah,
and I mean, one of the unique things, I love following the freedom movements in the Five Eyes countries, you know, New Zealand, Canada, the US and the UK. But one of the really unique things we got out of the UK was the Light Australia newspaper. The UK started it off, but it was the Light Australia newspaper kicked off out of WA. And I know the people of WA are very proud of this, which is why I'm really excited working with that awesome bunch of people over there. But we need a free and fair press to call this stuff out, because if the mainstream media won't, but if they see that eyeballs are being drawn to a certain topic, like the misinformation bill, or like something like this with election malfeasance, they will be like, oh, the money, advertisers, readership, okay, I'm going to go in that direction. But we're also seeing the rise of alternative media and also your own following as well. I mean, you've got many people that are subscribed to your email list. They want to hear from you directly. It's a bit like with Trump. People went and followed him in 2016 to follow his Twitter feed. But this is the sort of stories we're not seeing. And I do want to...
That's right.
A lot of people... I want to play this video because people forget. People forget these things, and I think it's important to remind them that this is exactly what went on election day, on the referendum day, with Alec Dumidji talking to his mother. He sent me this video because I'd interviewed him, and he said, Joel, I need you to get this out. This is nuts. And he's a very trustworthy guy. Check this out, guys.
Good morning, Mum. What did you just ring me for?
I'm just ringing you, why are we voting yes? Because I see a lot of Aboriginal people on TV got yeses on their t-shirt. That's the reason why I rang you, to ask you what I'm going to vote, yes or no.
Okay.
we doesn't really know what are we voting for.
So what do the people tell you in Doomadgee that you're voting for?
For someone to be in a Parliament House like Neville Bonner, which I seen on TV last week.
Yeah, well, Neville Bonner was a senator, Mum. He was a senator in the Senate, so they're misinforming you and basically misguiding you with lies and mistruths. So when you go up today to the voting pool there in Doomadgee, you're ringing from Doomadgee right now?
Yes, I'm in Doomadgee. I'm ready. I'm all dressed to go up to vote right now.
Now, will you vote no? Because they're lying to you. They're not giving you the full information behind why you're voting yes. You understand?
Yeah, no one doesn't even know, even in Doomadgee, why they're voting.
You tell all of our family, all the Doomadgee family and all the George family, they all need to vote no.
Okay, yeah.
What else did they say to you?
Oh, well, they just said you'll come and vote for referendum. I don't even know what that big word is. You know, referendum?
Yep. And this is the problem with the way they've consulted. They haven't gone around and consulted all of our people, and they haven't informed our people properly. So what they're doing is they're rushing through a vote to recognise Aboriginal people on their constitution. The Australian Constitution is a rule book and the law book of this land. Now, for us to be recognised on there, we actually need to negotiate a treaty. A treaty is the proper way forward because there needs to be consequences paid for the injustice and the crimes of stolen land and years of stolen wealth from our country, just like what the Queensland government did with you with your stolen wages. You understand?
Yeah, I'm going to sing out of my Damien where you're going, your brother.
Well,
Damien!
You tell all our family, including Brother Damien, everyone, to vote no, okay?
Rushing up the road, not to go and vote. Yeah.
You just say, I spoke to my son, and if anybody at that polling booth try and convince you to vote yes, you ring me while you're there. You say, this is my son, Alec Doomadgee, and he'll tell you the reasoning behind this, and you're not telling us the whole truth.
All right, yeah.
I've got to dig up another video. There's another video where they're actually recalling the story of them going up, and the electoral workers actually saying, no, this is to help get more Aboriginal voices into Parliament, and it's like, they're not meant to tell you that.
Yeah.
That I don't want to play the full video. There's other videos as well.
Sure.
But you guys get the point. And the reason why I'm spending so much time on the voice referendum is it was a great litmus test. If you voted no, there was a higher chance that you're for smaller government, you're for greater economic mobility, you're more conservatively leaning with regards to your family values, you want lower taxes, you want freedom of speech, you want just basically less government in your lives. And that's what a lot of these election resources I put up look like with the policy matrix, which I know you've seen this before, Nick, which compares the parties. This was in New South Wales, by the way, guys, on ethics, on environment, on public health and well-being and education. So what I did was I went to great expense to actually make a map, which I'm going to be sending you home with one, Nick, if you can pack it.
Yeah.
This map shows you exactly the areas that highest voted no. So in WA, you've got places like Cowan, for example. It's safe Labor. It's almost 11% Labor on a two-party preferred. But if you look at the no vote, it's a very safe no seat. And it's like, well, hang on a sec. A lot of the Liberals aren't probably putting as much resources into this seat because it's a safe Labor seat. But hang on, it's a safe no seat. And as I showed with that sort of policy matrix, these people, they generally are quite warm to what we want.
It's funny you should bring up Cowan, Joel, because our Liberal candidate there, Felicia, what an outstanding woman she is. She's of Nigerian descent.
I've met her. Yeah.
I had the opportunity, it was actually a privilege to sit in the audience and listen to her speak. It was about 2 weeks ago, one evening. She went up to the microphone. She had some papers in her hand, so I thought, okay, candidate, they're probably going to read their speech. Didn't look at the notes the whole time and delivered a passionate speech about the future of children in Australia and why she is so concerned. She and her husband came from Nigeria to Australia for a better life, and they have had a wonderful life here, and they're saying, what is going on here? Why are we getting all of this, quite frankly, woke garbage being pushed, rammed down our throats by governments at both the state and federal level? This is not why we came to Australia, and they want to fight for the Australia that they came to. And it was just such a privilege to be there. She was awesome.
And it's nice because, I mean, your background is Anglo-Saxon, right?
Yeah. So both my parents were born in France, in Nice, in the south of France, and they came to Australia. They migrated here, and originally for 1 or 2 years, and then they never left.
Yeah. See, straight white men. You've got kind of a bit of a rough. You've had a rough gig the last few years. You know, you've had the democratic socialists coming after us and the communists coming after you. And I say us because I went to an Anglo school. But I see. Then you see this black woman get up and tell them off.
Yeah.
And be more conservative than all of them, and you're like, oh, thank God.
Oh, she's just going to be such a breath of fresh air. I really hope that she wins. So that graphic is quite interesting that you showed there.
Yeah. So look, there's a lot of seats like that where I look at them and I'm like, well, we really ought to be investing some time and a bit more resources into that. And if you think it can't be done, I will remind you of a seat called Fowler. Fowler, you will remember this, Nick, because it was hilarious. Christina Keneally ran for Fowler for the 2022 election. The two-party preferred count, it was like 65% Labor to Liberal. And yet, I'm not surprised to see that Daly flipped it. Now, obviously, she had a lot of help from, she had a lot of connections in council. Frank Carbone he gets like 80%, 85% of the mayor vote in that area, and he was a big ally of her. But the idea that the people there were actually on side and conservative, I'm not shocked to see that they voted 60% no. And that is the argument I'm making to Liberals and to any organisation that'll listen to me ahead of the next election. It's you need to basically throw out this pendulum from the this is a pendulum which shows you all the parties and all the candidates in the lower house, all the members of parliament. Now, the lower you go on this pendulum, it's the more marginal the seat is.
Yeah.
Now, my argument to the Liberals is throw this thing out. You need to remake this, but with the yes/no vote, not with the two-party preferred vote. Because the Liberals, I mean, they've kind of strayed quite a bit from the Menzies We Believe statement, and I think the electorate are looking for something a bit more conservative and a bit more fresh, if I may say so myself. But I don't know. Look, I'm going to throw all that at you because I've been monologuing for a while. What do you think?
No, well, I think that makes a lot of sense to be able to do that kind of analysis first and foremost. But this is a real issue. So, again, I'll just talk from a West Australian context. As I said earlier, Rodger Cook is the Premier of Western Australia. He was the biggest champion for this. This is the person who called the rest of us dogs if we raised any concerns with regard to his shambolic rollout of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Laws. So fierce was his advocacy for the voice, etc. Now, in his cabinet, he has senior ministers. Two in particular I will name, right? Amber Jade Sanderson, she's the health minister who took over from him. And then you've got another chap by the name of Stephen Dawson, who word has it that, or rumour has it that he'll take over from her in health. No one wants health apparently in Western Australia. It's an absolute chaotic mess. But the reason I mention those two is not because of their desire for the health portfolio or otherwise, but because they are on the public record saying that they absolutely support the idea of a voice at a state level. So Western Australian voters should not forget that these people are adamant and determined to push something like this through. And we also know, with respect to this same Labor mob in WA, that if they say something, be very, very careful about what you're listening to, because they were asked prior to the last election, if you win, will you change the electoral laws? And the then Premier, Mark McGowan, said, no, it's not on the agenda, and he was quite shirty with the media about them pressing him on this. Within the first 6 months, you're going to change the laws. We've got a different system in the upper house as a result of it, like you said. So,
got rid of the GVTs. Group voting tickets?
Yep, and we now have a single electorate across the whole of Western Australia rather than the regions that we had previously. Which interestingly enough probably increases the prospects for minor parties. Yep. But again, it's the case of a politician and a leader saying one thing and then going and doing the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It's, again, disgraceful conduct. But no wonder people get very exasperated with politics.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting. I'm very eager to generate a policy matrix and work out who these people are that are running, seeing what their history is, seeing what party platform they're running on, and what their personal background is and all of this. So that's why I'm really excited. After the 26th of October passed this year, we had fought something like 6 elections in the span of 2 months. It was nuts. I can honestly say this, no one has fought more elections in the last 4 years than myself and my team, because we're in every state, local and federal. And we wrapped things up in October, and I was like, I'm really excited now because I can have a breather. I can focus on a state I really love, like WA. See, WA, South Australia, I really like the Liberal Party in those states. But I do also see some avenues with the minor parties to really help them as well, because you need both. You need a Greens of the right to back up the Libs, like in other states. Like, for example, Alex Antic in South Australia and Sarah Game, they work in tandem really well. Obviously, one's on a state level, one's on a federal level. Yep. But they work in tandem really well on issues that matter. So they appear together and they don't clash at places like the Babies Born Alive rallies and the abortion rallies and the protecting men's health sort of rallies and those sorts of things. And I see that healthy relationship, and whatever I can do to help foster that, I think it's brilliant.
Well, we're going to need it in Western Australia. We're very encouraged that the Liberal leader in WA, Libby Medham, that she has come out and said that she's going to end the madness that currently sees, because of Labor's legislation, any Western Australian of any age, so in other words, including children, eligible to change the sex on their birth certificate. Now, she has said...
People don't know this.
Yeah, that's... Well, but again, mainstream media don't talk about this at all, right? But the average Western Australian, if you say that to them, do you understand that somebody's going to be able to change the sex on their birth certificate? Their instinctive reaction, quite rightly, is that's ridiculous, right? Sex is observed at birth, and it is recorded. There are certain things on a birth certificate that are recorded as fact. The time, the place of the birth, and sex is observed at birth, and it is recorded at that time. So very encouragingly, Libby is the first, as I understand it, in the nation as a leader to say, no, look, this is madness, we're going to stop this. Now, it's one thing to make that commitment, but then in order to be able to deliver it, you need to have a majority in both houses of Parliament, and that's where, as you say, some of these minor parties will have a role to play.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, we've got to be real about this. The minor parties are so divided all the time. I mean, I think in WA especially, there was 3 members of Parliament elected on the One Nation Pauline Hanson ticket, and then they all left the party.
Yeah, so it was in the last Parliament where they had 3 elected. I think it'd be fair to say, and I know the chaps involved, I like them. I like all 3 of those guys. We got along well. I had a good rapport with each of them. 3 very different personalities. Yes, one ended up leaving and effectively being an independent, and the other 2 had a, shall we say, difficult relationship.
Right. Yeah, and this is the frustrating thing. It's like, obviously politics is the business of bringing people together on similar values and fighting on issues that you have agreement and sometimes it's disagreement. But the left, they are just so, what are they? Collectivist in nature. They're not individualists. And that means when the push comes to shove and the fight comes up, they come together, they consolidate.
Yeah.
Whereas the right, they just sort of scatter.
Well, and it's a natural consequence, Joel, of our inherent belief in freedom and liberty. And so if you believe in freedom and liberty and you then elect people to Parliament who share that value, then that's going to manifest itself in the way that people interact with one another. They want to have the freedom to be able to disagree, to have robust discussions, to have a conscience vote like we do have in the Liberal Party. Whereas the left, or in this particular case, let's say Labor, very collectivist, and as a result of that, they vote like Borgs or droids. They just vote like stormtroopers, and you just do that. And if you don't, you're going to get expelled out of the party. You're just not entitled to express a different view. So you can understand perhaps or even maybe, shall I say, admire the practical outcome of that, but at what cost? It's at the cost of the liberty and the freedom of the individual. So I guess it's one of the natural consequences from those of us from the right of politics. If we believe in liberty, we believe in freedom, it is going to mean that from time to time there's going to be disagreement. I think it's worth it in the end, because otherwise, what's the alternative?
Yeah, well, I think that's why I see a gap in the market. I think that there's a huge opportunity and I have no aspirations to run and become a politician, because I see a gap in the market to build that synergy between the minor parties, between the conservative parties, so that we can start winning together rather than, division means death.
Oh, it's hard enough as it is. There's no time to be fighting amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
By all means, have a robust discussion and have a disagreement, but let's get on with it, guys.
Internally. But when you go out there, and
Absolutely.
you face the foe, it's like, okay, well, these guys actually want to chop my kids dangling off, we agree that that's not a good thing.
Yeah. I'll give you a practical example. Say, for instance, this birth certificate issue, right? Rather than, which will inevitably happen, some people will then want to try and maybe attack Libby and the Liberal Party and saying, oh, you're not going far enough, right? I get it, right? By all means, have a view, continue to express it. Let's try to enhance policy as we move forward. But in the meantime, while you've got something, let's run with it.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll see what happens at the election. It's going to be very, very interesting. Definitely a strong contrast in policy position on that issue at the very least.
Speaking of which, let's pivot to the live sheep export. Now, this is yet another farming industry which is about to be decimated by government legislation. In July this year, we saw the story drop that the Federal Labor Party are actually, they've solidified the fact that on May 1st, 2028, live sheep export, you're done. Now, this has been a highly controversial topic. People saying that the live sheep export, it's, RSPCA Australia, for example, saying, it's cruel, it's inhumane. The export industry, however, they've been saying, hang on, we've been making changes. Yes, we did stuff up. We had some disasters due to, the weather in the Middle East and, the conditions we were transporting these sheep on these ships. But we've now got veterinarians around the clock. We've added, upgraded the AC systems, and the sheep have never been better. But now you're going to punish us even further by completely eliminating this trade.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to stop. These people in the Middle East, they still want these sheep, but they're just going to get them from somewhere else with less quality sort of, being taken care of.
Well, there's the irony, right? So your analysis, again, is excellent, Joel, because this is a massive issue in Western Australia.
Yeah.
Massive issue. And as you quite rightly point out, mistakes were made. I don't know anyone in the industry who says, oh, no, it was all operating perfectly previously. Clearly not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Clearly not. But what are the complaints now? See, this is the crazy thing. So mistakes were made in the past. A minority, we might say, of bad faith operators have damaged the reputation of a lot of good faith operators. Nevertheless, the industry reforms itself. It's now operating, as I understand it, and this is not my area of expertise. I'm former lawyer, now a parliamentarian, but as it has been explained repeatedly to me, they're now operating at a gold standard. At a gold standard, and now we're going to shut it down. Makes no sense whatsoever. in terms of fairness. This is actually unfair. It makes no sense economically for Australia. In particular, Western Australia gets hurt as a result of this. But then thirdly, you know, I really appreciated your final point there, that, well, what happens in this vacuum? If Western Australia and Australia doesn't provide this live sheep market, where do you think it's going to come from? And do you think that the standard is going to be gold, as we've been providing in recent times? None of this makes any sense. This is plainly a case of political ideology being rammed through rather than proper debate, proper consultation, you know, an enhanced policy position. None of that's happening here, and there is a big campaign continuing in Western Australia, both with the Liberal Party and the National Party, obviously, pushing back pretty hard on that. So I think Labor's going to be punished in the regional areas outside the Perth metropolitan area, but there's plenty of people in Perth who support the farming industry. So it's going to be interesting to see how badly they get punished there too.
Yeah, they had to keep the sheep rally, I think, on about the 9th of September, it might have been. And they came to Canberra. They flew across to Canberra, a big, let's call it a gaggle of them. But there was quite a few of them. And I was learning about this industry, and I was like, oh my God. So this is a uniquely, you know, a lot of people in Sydney might be like, we have heaps of that in New South Wales and Queensland and Victoria. No, we don't. No, we don't. This is actually a uniquely WA thing. To export sheep whole and live is a unique thing. Part of the reason I think they ship it to the Middle East so much is the Middle East have certain halal practices, for example. They need the sheep to be alive so that they can, because there's certain ways that you kill a sheep that's halal certified. For example, you got to face the sheep towards Mecca and kill it, for example. Like that's the sort of thing, or the cow. That's the sort of thing they do. And there's certain trades and bleeding processes that they follow. That's why they want the sheep alive and as it is. But they're going to kill off this whole industry. Farmers are going to commit suicide. The industry is going to be decimated. There isn't a simple pivot to a new industry. They've been saying, oh, yeah, you can just get jobs in meat packaging, processing, and all that sort of thing. And that's, you know, and the government sort of bumped up the amount of money that they're going to receive. But it's a pittance. Yeah.
And to give you an idea of just how arrogant, incompetent the Albanese government have been on this, the Western Australian Labor government, they have expressed, and their agricultural minister, Jackie Jarvis, support for the industry and concern about what the Albanese government are doing, and they're still just saying, too bad, this is what's happening, take it or leave it. Now, you know, again, my criticism, you know, and viewers will read into this what they like. My criticism is that the Cook Labor government and, you know, Mr Cook and Jackie Jarvis haven't advocated strongly enough to Mr Albanese. They could be really shouting a lot louder than what they have been. So I think they've had timid voices, but if I give credit where credit's due, at least their policy position is correct. They understand that this is very important for Western Australia, but then they're going to war with the Albanese government with a few water pistols when you need to do a lot better than that.
And we're seeing that, and that's the friction. That's the friction, that I call it little brother syndrome between WA and Canberra, because it's not the East States, it's Canberra that's the problem. And I see this situation because they do it to the eastern states on other issues. On coal, they're like, oh, let's stop exporting coal. And it's like, well, you idiot, you don't realise that brown coal from Brazil is not as efficient as Australian black coal. So you're actually going to lead to more emissions around the world rather than less if you cut off our exports to China of black coal. You know, and then we've also got other industries in the East Coast, like the wool industry, like the sugarcane industry, like chickens and poultry and government legislation, you know, really attacking these industries. It's amazing because we've got the worst of both worlds. We've got a protection racket with Coles and Woolies, where they destroy the farmers because there's no genuine competition, and they keep other supermarkets from coming in, but then we get regulatory pressures killing the farmers from another angle in the worst kinds of way. And it's like, who are you serving?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and the really tough part is the farmers are such a small population, they can't really electorally pack a punch until the Australian people realise that they can't afford food and we might starve.
Yeah. And,
Like,
and Canberra driving these policy decisions rather than consulting and facilitating outcomes. And them driving policy decisions time and time again is a disaster. And wasn't it a beautiful thing on the voice referendum, just to quickly segue back to that just for a moment, to make this point, wasn't it a beautiful thing that every jurisdiction says no, except for one, the ACT, which says yes? I just thought that was just the icing on the cake to just expose what's going on there. These guys are, you know, they have forgotten that their role is to facilitate on behalf of the Federation of States, policy outcomes, not to ram down our throats what they think is best for the rest of us.
I think we'd all support a Department of Government efficiency in Australia. Have you heard of Dingo?
No.
It's the Australian version of that. It's basically Matt Canavan put this graphic out. It's like Dingo, and it had like a graphic. It was like Department, of I'll find it. People will be.
It
putting
sounds like something Matt would do.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's basically our version of Doge in Department of Government efficiency. I love it, and we do need it, because if we, I'm trying to remember what the budget is every year. I think it's $1 trillion, federal budget, and it just keeps growing. And we've got like 1 million people coming in every year, and we're only a 27 million population country. This is not sustainable. We do need, and this is the thing, the immigrants are often the most angry about this. I say it's the immigrants that are grandfathered in, the ones that are like, they've been here for at least 2-3 generations. They're like, Vietnamese, and they're like, what the hell is going on? I came here on a boat in the 60s. Like friends of mine that, I went to school with, their parents came on a boat in the 60s. Fleeing the Vietnam War, and they're like, what has happened to Australia? This is, we didn't take welfare when we came here. We actually integrated into the system. One friend in particular, his family, they started a pharmacy, and they did very well for themselves. They went to the, within one generation, they were sending their kids to the King's School, for example, and it's like they're doing really well, but now we're seeing where things are going with this mass expenditure, the bureaucracy bubble in Canberra growing. No wonder WA hates
that's right.
Canberra so much.
And like you, Joel, it's not like we're anti immigration. I mean, what a hypocrite I would be. I'm a beneficiary. I'm a product of parents who migrated to Australia in 1970. Dare I say it, on a boat. That's how they got here, right? In 1970, originally intending to be here for 1 or 2 years, never left, but made a big sacrifice, with a bit of an adventure, but made a contribution. My dad was in banking, my mum was a teacher, and they made a contribution to society. And obviously, we still retained some of our, in our little family, some French culture. That's okay. But we participated in Australian culture, and for myself, my brother, my sister, well, we know nothing else other than to be, Aussies.
Mate, can I just say, you got something to be really proud of. If they came here in the 70s, their kid went to become like the honourable member of the upper house. That's amazing. That's actually really cool. Yeah.
Because opportunities exist in Australia, right? Anyone has an opportunity to be able to do something. And that's the wonderful way of life that we've got in Australia. And we want to retain that, but not have this excessive intrusion by government in everything. In them ramming their policy, their woke policy agendas down our throats and so forth. And that's why you then have, as you say, those older migrants who are then saying, hang on a second, this is not what this was all about.
Yeah.
And that's why I told you the story earlier about Felicia in Cowan and why she's firing up. Yeah.
I've met her. She's lovely. I really like. I'm going to
She'll be
do
a force if she gets into Parliament.
Yeah, and this is the thing. A lot of people don't understand this. The minor parties don't really have a shot at winning lower house seats. That's why they go for the Senate. That's why they go for all your favourite freedom members of Parliament federally. They're in the Senate. They're not in the lower house. But you don't form government from the Senate. You form government from the lower house. That's why the Liberal Party, people are like, oh, Joel, yeah, why do you support the Liberal Party? I'm like, you don't form government from the Senate.
No.
Pauline Hanson will never be the Prime Minister because she's in the Senate. Neither will Malcolm Roberts or Gerard Rennick. I support them, and you'll see, us support them in, as the number one candidates in Queensland. But at a lower house level, you need people like Felicia to run for these pre-selections in the Liberal Party to pick the Prime Minister. Otherwise, we will never have someone like an Alex Antic, someone of that ilk, actually become the Prime Minister at a federal level.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I would really encourage, and I keep saying this to anyone in Western Australia and across the nation, is interrogate the values and the beliefs of each candidate. So rather than just casting somebody aside because they're part of a particular party, interrogate it a little bit further. It would be distressing for me if somebody said, well, we're just not voting for the Liberal Party. Well, hang on, come and have a chat to me. Maybe you might be inclined to vote for me, and I'll be able to share with you the names of other candidates who are a bit more like that. And obviously, you've already mentioned some heroes like Alex Antic and others. Well, they're Liberal MPs.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it always goes back to the individual, as you say.
100%.
You can have the Liberal Party is a very broad church, and in my view, there is a big fight over the values of the Liberal Party. I think there's some people like Alex Antic that are trying to drag it towards the roots. The Menzies statement, if you guys haven't seen the Menzies We Believe statement online on the Liberal Party's own website, that was their founding document. What was it, 10 minor parties that Menzies coddled together and formed the Liberal Party out of, including the United Australia Party back in the day. And he founded it around this small government statement, basically saying government needs to be restrained. That's a classic Liberal.
Yep.
A classical Liberal. And when I see that, I'm like, okay, there's this war in the party where, and I'm talking about this specifically with regards to my state in New South Wales, where it's probably the most heated, where there are people that are trying to drag it towards that, back to that statement, back to its roots. And then there are others that are trying to be a bit more progressive, like Alex Hawke and like, Michael Photius, and these lobbyists for these renewable companies. And I get really concerned when I see that, because I'm like, guys, what are you doing? That's not what the party used to be. And now, you worry about this teal threat, you're losing more votes to One Nation, the UAP, the Libertarian Party. You've got to go back. You will form government if you win those people back in the lower house. But no, and that's the problem I see in the UK, which is very developed right now. Did you see Nigel Farage when we brought him out?
No.
Right. Nigel was great. I do believe I'll post his videos again, but he's now challenging the establishment Conservative Party there, because they've just, for example, on immigration, they've done nothing. They've been in government for 15 years or something, done nothing.
Yes, because once again, people get into politics and they become paralysed. This idea that they came in with good intent, they came in with good motivation, and suddenly they've been captured by the system, and there's this political paralysis that takes them over, and so then they end up doing nothing. They don't follow through on issues. They don't ask the questions that need to be asked. There's no genuine perseverance. Instead, their total focus is survival. Well, forget about survival. That was never the reason why you got involved in the first place. And if it was, then frankly, you're a disgrace and you shouldn't be in there anyway. But this happens time and time again, and very, I don't know how you would describe it, perhaps fortuitously, one of the few silver linings from the last WA state election, when we got absolutely smashed. Never before in the history of WA did we do as badly as what we did, and I don't think we'll ever see another outcome like that in our lifetime. But the great thing is the number of people coming in at the next election will be greater than the incumbent. And that gives you a chance to change political culture. And the same thing happens in the Labor Party incident, because they've got a lot of people retiring and they're going to lose a stack of seats too. So
what do you mean by that? The amount of people coming in is greater than...
So we've obviously got some incumbent members, but very few in number, right? I mean, I'll give you an example. In the upper house, we've got 5 members. In the lower house, it's 5 that are continuing. In the lower house, we've got 2. So we've got 7 incumbent members continuing at the next election. That's microscopic, right?
Yeah.
We're winning more than 7 seats across both houses of parliament. So the number that are coming in will be greater than the incumbents. And why that's significant, it means that if we can, people like you, Joel, and others who are concerned about this, can build relationships, keep these people accountable to why they got involved in the first place, you get to change political culture, because the new ones swamp the incumbents in terms of their mere number and presence. And
I'm into that. It's a slow process.
Wow, and that's very encouraging. We've got a great opportunity in WA as a result of that.
Yeah, look, I make no bones about it, guys. I've said this many times over the last few years. If everyone in Australia was mandated to join a political party, the Greens would actually be a pro-nuclear party. You know, even the Greens of Germany and France are pro-nuclear. But the people that vote for these parties, they're being represented by people that don't actually represent those values. The people that vote Liberal, they're voting for what they thought was Liberal, the Menzies We Believe statement, but that's not what it is. The people that vote Labor because their parents did, because that back in the Union days they were the Workers' Party, they're not the Workers' Party anymore.
No.
They're the Champagne Socialists. And then we also see the situation with the Greens. They're like, oh, green, you know, it's nuts and whatever. It's a watermelon. Green on the outside and red on the inside, because they're communists, but they're green, have a green facade. And same with the Teals. I mean, you know, like, you know, you just got to go out and see all the different cars they drive when they're polling, and they've got the Teslas and the four-wheel drives. But guys, you mentioned something about the Parliament. The incumbents coming in are going to outnumber... Sorry, the people coming in are going to outnumber the incumbents. If you look at this particular graph, guys, this is on Wikipedia. This actually shows the makeup of the Parliament in WA, just so you understand how much the Liberals got decimated for various reasons, by the way. There was a lot of leadership... again, this is 4 years ago. The Liberals got decimated to the point that there's only 3 Liberals and 3 Nationals in the upper house. Is it the legislative count?
In the lower house.
In the lower house.
Out of 59 members, that's right. And 6 out of 59.
And in the upper house where you dwell, there are 3 Nationals and 2 Nationals.
There's now 2 Nationals.
Two Nationals,
right. That's because there was 3 and one's gone independent. And there's 7 Liberals. So it's at least given us sort of, you know, a fighting cohort, obviously still outnumbered. And in the upper house there, as you can see with the red, you know, it swamps the chamber. So they've got an absolute majority in both houses of parliament. And that's been very dangerous. And as a result of that, they have been ramming legislation through whenever they want, which is why it's all the more remarkable that they ended up repealing that shambolic Aboriginal cultural heritage laws, because they didn't have to.
People power.
Right, exactly.
Amazing.
Right. And that's where perseverance matters.
And this is the thing. My inclination to call election results. I don't think we'll see a Liberal government, and I can speak perfectly transparently on this, guys. But I don't think we'll see a majority in the lower house of the coalition. But in the upper house, I think there's a very, very, very certain chance that you're going to have a coalition. Surge with the amount of seats they've got with the new system. And definitely we're going to have a crossbench, a very large crossbench. And I'm excited for it, because I know it's going to give you guys something to work with.
100%. I've been involved in 4 parliaments, Joel, and the first 2, my party was in government. This 4th one, obviously it's been an absolute democratic disaster, because we've just had arrogance and authoritarianism just rammed down our throats for 4 years. But the 3rd one that I was involved in, even though we were in opposition, and no parliamentarian from one of the major parties wants to be in opposition, you always want to be in government, even though we were in opposition, it was the best parliament that I was involved in, purely from a democratic participation perspective. It was the best. Why? Because neither of the major parties had a majority. No one had a majority. Everyone had to work with one another, the crossbench and so on and so forth. There was none of this fake, Labor Green coalition that then got them a majority and so on and so forth. It was tight. It was tight. And if you did the work, you could persuade people on a case-by-case basis. And we won more votes in opposition than we lost in that whole 4 years of Parliament. It was very rewarding. Now, again, I'm not wanting to be in opposition in the next Parliament. Of course, we want to be in government. But wouldn't it be great for our democracy if there was that, genuine capacity to be able to scrutinise legislation and bring forward quality policy outcomes rather than this just arrogance and incompetence? Has been quite unbelievable.
And I will say this, of all the parliaments I've been to in the country, I haven't been to Tasmania's parliament or the Northern Territory, but of all the parliaments I've been to, WA, and this might sound strange to people that aren't spiritual, but it doesn't feel evil,
Right.
if that makes sense. I've been to the Melbourne Parliament, and that was by far the worst. I've been, as soon as I land in Victoria, I'm like, I just feel this sort of weird feeling. But I get to WA, despite it being, overwhelmingly Labor, I actually feel quite nice when I'm there. Again, this may sound very strange to people and a bit woo-woo, but when I see what's going on around the country, you do sense an energy about it in different states and a different level of positivity and negativity. And I've been to your parliament a few times, and I'm very optimistic about WA. I love the people. I like seeing that synergy. When I walk in the parliaments in Canberra or in Melbourne, there's an iciness as you walk around, like you've got eyes on you all the time. From MPs, from staffers, from everything.
Yes.
But it sounds like, and I feel like you're affirming it when you're saying that there's a synergy, we work together on certain legislations when we had a balanced parliament.
Yeah, I guess there's a certain warmth there, maybe, is probably what you're describing, and a bit more of a, laid back, probably West Aussie type of character to the parliament. I think that would be true. And the funny thing in politics is that, warmth and relationships flourish often because of work that parliamentarians do together on parliamentary committees. And it's parliamentary committees that suddenly enable a parliamentarian to get to know another person from another party and realise actually they don't have horns, they don't eat their children alive and all these kinds of things. And, there's strange ideas that you always assume the worst, the other person's evil and, conceited and so forth. And so some mutual respect is developed. But what concerns me at the end of the day, Joel, I think that those are true characteristics of the WA Parliament, but my concern is that the average parliamentarian is not persevering when they're taking up matters. Issues are just taken up in a half-hearted fashion, and that's the culture that I'd like to see changed in the next election.
No, absolutely. I just to close off this particular topic, I want to draw everyone's attention to this particular video of Nigel Farage having the Prime Minister of the UK walk up to him, Kier Starmer, and a lot of people have sort of been slamming this and being like, this isn't good and this is terrible and politicians shouldn't get on together. This is a good thing. This is actually a very positive thing. I mean, the idea that someone like Nigel, Kier respects him to the point that he walks up to him and they're engaging and they're chatting. Obviously, they are diametrically opposed, with policy and politically. But the idea that the Prime Minister is actually like, I need to have a relationship with this person, it tells you that Nigel also is such an effective leader that he needs to be treated with a level of respect, and you need to have a relationship with. Someone that you 100%. Don't have a relationship with, it's like, well, you're irrelevant, you have zero power and whatever. But this is also the relationship that Nigel Farage also had with people in the European Parliament, people that he'd often debate with profusely.
Yep.
And this is a good thing to have that relationship with them, because I think that the fish rots from the head down. And if you have your political leaders not getting on well, I'm not talking about being in bed together. They should be politically pure to what they're running on and to what their voters want. But if they're getting on well, then you don't have a leaderless army running around. You have people that can be like, no, we're not barbarians. We can have it out and let the best arguments win and put it to the public, and whoever wins the popular vote, it's done.
Yeah. I haven't seen that footage that you just showed there. Right. So that's the first time I've seen it. I don't think there's anything strange about that at all. I think that it should be applauded. I think it should be encouraged. I don't think there's anything sinister about all of that. What you've just shown me seemed like two experienced, mature men, leaders of their respective parties, conversing with one another and doing what I would have thought that the people in the UK would want of their leaders, which is wherever reasonably possible to be working together for the common good of the people of the UK, just as we want in Australia. I don't want, Joel, I imagine you will be the same with me, I don't want Albanese and Dutton to be fighting all the time, right? That's not good for Australia. We want them to be able to work together wherever reasonably possible. But what we do expect is that we want a strong opposition who's going to ask the questions that need to be asked of whoever's in government, whether it's Liberal or Labor, vice versa, because a government is going to be best when an opposition is doing its job, isn't timid, isn't scared, isn't hiding under the political doona, is asking the questions that need to be asked, not once, repeatedly, until there are real transparent answers from government. And if the Liberals are in power, then that responsibility shifts to the Labor Party. That's what they need to do. Now, they can do that in a forceful, robust, but respectful fashion, right? They don't have to tear each other apart every time. And again, remember what we were talking about earlier about the Voice. One of the things that we despised about that particular expensive, unnecessary proposal by Mr. Albanese is it was going to permanently create division in Australia. We don't support that. We don't want division. No. So if those two chaps are having a chat to each other, and I don't even know what the circumstances might have been. Maybe there's been some good news in one person's family. Isn't it good if the other person can say great news about such and such, or happy birthday, or whatever it might have been? It's almost a bit disturbing if people are always seeing things like that through sinister eyes.
No, absolutely. And that's the problem. After COVID, and that's another situation which divided families. Even today, we're about to go into Christmas and there are families that still haven't seen each other because of the COVID stuff. That's what, our country went through. But we see this situation with these parties. Yeah, we want them to be get on well, but be ideologically independent as well. But let's go to this topic related to WA of immigration. We've been seeing, again, this is a strange concept for Australia because there's not many boats, but we had Tony Abbott stop the boats back in 2013 when he was, that's what he ran on. He said, I'm going to stop the boats, and he did it.
And he did it, absolutely, super effective.
And so we've got this situation now where we've seen some boats trickling into WA. Not many, but it's unusual, and it was sort of front page news for a little while there in some of the newspapers in the country. And if you haven't been following, guys, this was the story from The Guardian specifically. This is from earlier this year in February. But yeah, these boats are arriving in WA, and I'm just surprised it didn't, as you said earlier, didn't get as much press as you thought it would. And I don't want to see this become a regular thing. It shows Australia to be weak militarily, weak in terms of immigration policy. It encourages more boats to come. It's a slippery slide.
Yep.
What's your reaction, people in WA's reaction when they see this kind of thing?
Yeah, look, I think it's fair to say that even people who are not Liberal Party supporters would accept that nobody did a better job on this than Tony Abbott. he was the best. Now again, people might not have necessarily agreed with his policy, but I think the fair-minded political observer will say he absolutely did what he promised that he would do. And it's really important for people to pause for a moment and ask themselves the question: well, why is it that we want to stop the boats? You know, I mean, it's a great catchphrase, right?
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean? Why do we even want to be doing that, right? Well, why are we scared about boats? Because remember, I said to you, my parents came to Australia from France in 1970 on a boat, right? So it's not like we're anti-boats per se, but it's more the circumstances in which people are arriving to Australia. We welcome people, but it has to be on our terms. That's the only way in which we can sustainably run our country. If people are happy with our general way of life in Australia and they want to maintain it or reclaim some of it that we've lost, then it has to be done from a policy perspective that ensures that who comes here is done on our terms, not them forcing their way into Australia. So that's why, in part, we have this mantra, if you like, about stopping the boats, but it's also for the benefit of the individuals because they're being taken advantage of by essentially people movers, and they are being taken advantage of in unsafe circumstances. So it's because we care about them. Again, we believe in the infinite value of every human life, and so it's unsafe for them to be travelling to Australia in those type of circumstances. So it's the twofold reasons why we say stopping the boats. Now, at the moment, my particular concern, Joel, is we do have people who have arrived in Australia illegally, and there's been, how can we describe it? I don't think there's any other way than saying it's been chaos with respect to the High Court decision, and some of these people have been released into the community. And it's still not clear to me that the Albanese government have got a handle on this. I remain concerned that we've got people with serious history, violent history, who are out and about in the community, not citizens of Australia, and really have manipulated the system. What's being done about that? That is where I think the people of Western Australia, if I can be so bold as to speak for a proportion of them at least, are more concerned than necessarily the boat issue. Not that we're not concerned about. We definitely don't want to see a repeat of the disaster that was happening previously, which is why Tony Abbott was so effective as he was. But once they are here, well, what are we doing with them? Particularly the ones who have a history of violent crime. That's a big concern.
Yeah. No, it's very concerning, and it's tough because you're getting not much very strong rhetoric at all from Albanese, and it's outrageous and a slippery slide. It'll change very
quiet again, right? Like, isn't it strange how these things just suddenly just go all quiet? Well, why? What's going on? Right. This is what I said earlier about the voice referendum. Well, what's happened a year later with regard to the plight of Indigenous Australians? What have you done, Mr. Albanese? What is happening with regard to these detainees who have been released into the community?
Yeah, and we don't have a very big navy. A lot of people don't realise for an island nation, our navy is tiny. It's like less than 25 ships.
Yep.
That's not very. It's not easy to.
Which is why we need to be having strong alliances with those around the world who share our values, like the United States, like the United Kingdom. I mean, there's this AUKUS deal for a reason, and I know certainly my friend and colleague in Western Australia, Andrew Hastie, there's probably been no bigger a proponent for that than him. And I mean, this guy knows what he's talking about.
No, absolutely. I forgot to mention that there was actually on, was it Friday night? I was here, middle of the night, live streaming the great debate in WA. If we can bring this.
I couldn't be there because I was already on my plane flight over here.
Right. Yeah. So this was a last minute event. I was sort of like, Graham's said, Joel, we're doing this event in WA. Senator Malcolm Roberts and a few others are going to be there. We're basically prosecuting the case against the Premier that the event that with during COVID, the things that went wrong, what's actually in the jabs and all that sort of thing. Did you get a chance to catch any? Obviously, it was a very long stream. It was about four almost 5 hours stream. But did you catch any clips after the fact?
No, I'm afraid I haven't. I was invited to attend, but I've been in Sydney for the National Life Summit, and so I haven't caught any of that. But on that general topic, I can say this, Joel, that we've just had in this final week of Parliament, of course, then the final opportunity to ask questions. And one of the questions that I've asked is of the Premier, Rodger Cook, because, again, something that mainstream media don't talk about, they don't share information. More than just over 2 years ago, November 2022, there was the end of the so-called state of emergency declarations in Western Australia. Now, we probably don't have time to go into all the ins and outs of that. So suffice to say, Joel, that the state of emergency declarations in Western Australia were being redeclared every 14 days. And in the end, it was being done blindly. And why I say that is because I had asked the questions of the Emergency Minister, the Minister for Emergency Services, and said, have you ever read the health advice that you guys keep saying justifies the continuation of these state of emergency declarations? And in Parliament, because he can't lie under oath in Parliament, he said no. He'd never once read the health advice. So we had a farcical situation in Western Australia where the Emergency Minister keeps declaring these state of emergencies despite the fact he's not reading the health advice. And then we had the Premier and the Deputy Premier going to Italy, across the globe to encourage people to come to Australia for tourism purposes. And I said, we either got an emergency or we don't. Now, if we're in a state of emergency, you're not encouraging tourists to come into Australia, into Western Australia. So obviously, this is a complete farce. The state of emergency declarations then stopped because the political pressure was too great. But what they did with sleight of hand is they then shifted those emergency powers in Western Australia from ministerial level to the police commissioner. They handed over for 2 years a blank cheque to the police commissioner to be able to invoke these emergency powers whenever he wanted. We managed to get a sunset clause built into that outrageous piece of legislation. Yeah. And so this week I asked the Premier about that because the beginning of November, these special emergency powers for the police commissioner ended. They expired. Right. And I asked the Premier, will you give an unequivocal commitment that you won't reintroduce this legislation? Well, he wouldn't. He said he wouldn't entertain hypotheticals. I mean, Joel, how can that be a hypothetical? He has brought in this legislation 2 years ago. It's been in place. It's not a hypothetical. Yep. It's now expired. Are you intending, after the election or any time soon, to reintroduce it? Just answer the question. He wouldn't answer that question. It's completely outrageous, but very typical, and I don't want Western Australians to forget that.
We've got to post these videos.
Yeah.
I've got to get that video. I will find it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll get it. I'll get it to you. And I mean, I also asked him in that same question, will you commit then, if you are going to have emergency declarations into the future? Because I'm one, Joel, and maybe I'm now going to say something that some of your viewers will want to smash the screen over. I don't have a problem with governments of the day having emergency powers, but it's a big but. It needs to be rare, and it needs to be in justified circumstances. If there's a cyclone, there's a flood, there's a fire, I don't have a problem with the government using emergency powers for a limited period of time. It needs to be rare. It needs to be overtly justified, and any time that it's used, it needs to be counterbalanced with additional oversight. And the best people to do that are Parliament. And none of that happened, of course, in this farcical situation that we know about. And, of course, I asked him about that. So will you commit to it being rare? Will you commit to cooperating with Parliament? I won't entertain hypotheticals, he says. Such is the arrogance of the Premier of Western Australia. And Western Australians need to know about it. And I would say other people around Australia need to be very mindful about what their premiers are going to do.
Well, look, I mean, things can change very quickly. We saw a situation not so long ago that there was the Liberal Party was wiped out around the country except in Tasmania. And yeah, I was told at the time, someone said to me, Joel, don't be under any illusions how quickly it can flip. It tends to flip quite quickly. And we saw the Northern Territory flip. It's a Liberal majority now.
Yep.
We've seen a Liberal majority in Queensland as well. I think it could have been bigger if they ran on a bit more conservative message. I mean, the place voted 70% no. I reckon they should have been a complete wipeout, like a super majority. But they did get a majority just. And yeah, I mean, WA's up next.
Yep.
Federal's not long after that, most likely. And so I'm very excited. I'm very excited about it.
Big opportunities, yep.
Huge opportunities. And, we talk very candidly on and off camera about what my goals are. My goal is for a Liberal government which is complemented by a very strong crossbench, because obviously the Liberal Party in the past has had leaders like Malcolm Turnbull. It helps to have a minor party crossbench to keep them on the beaten track.
It's important for anyone in life to have accountability. And, even let's say, for example, Joel, with regard to your own program here, right? It's important for you to have somebody that you trust, somebody who's going to behind the scenes, asking you the questions that need to be asked. I need it in my life as well. Everybody needs it. So whether it's Liberal, Labor or otherwise, you do need people who are prepared to hold them to account because we've seen, not just in Australia but around the world, when someone has too much power, especially for too long, the people who suffer are the individuals, and it's our individual freedoms that are undermined as a result of it. So, yeah, I mean, your aspiration is not just noble but very important.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I see that there's a lot of good people out there. You meet them every day, and they just don't yet understand how the political process is done, and that's why I think these conversations are so critical. Nick, I reckon we could have gone for another hour, but it is a relatively short trip that you're here, and I pray that you can get everything done that you need to.
Appreciate
it. But you are welcome on anytime, virtually or in person, preferably in person.
Yep.
But next time you're here, I hope to have a full panel here, another 2 or 3 people here as well, so we can break some more stories up.
Yep.
But we will chat ahead of the election again, probably early next year.
Thanks very much for having me on. It's been great to visit the Ark.
No, my pleasure. And if people want to follow you, I am going to put the link to your email subscription in the description. If people want to see your weekly emails that you send out, updating them about
every Friday, 6:15, of course, 6:15 Western Australian time.
Yeah.
People, they can set their alarm for it.
Yeah, big list. You got more emails than I do. Very well done.
96,000 and going. So
96,000.
Yep.
That's huge.
Yep.
That's nuts. That's actually crazy. Well, Nick, thank you so much. God bless you.
Thanks, Joel.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me for the Ark episode 22. I will see you later this week. I have a podcast on Thursday, a live of talking about cryptocurrencies, which I'm really looking forward to again with our friends at Stormrake. But without further ado, I'll see you guys later. Thank you.